Revierkohle nach Bergbau.
On July 26, 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, met in Geneva with a final session on the sixth assessment report on the climate and its alleged crisis. The draft has the same tenor as all the years before. Now, however, one can predict the bleak future even more precisely. After that, there will be more heat waves, more hunger, more floods and greater species extinction in the future. Around 230 experts from 200 countries agree on that. With the small difference, in the real scientific community there is no such continuous correspondence. And it cannot exist at all, because science is not a coordination process. In the case of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this only works because the IPCC is a political and not a scientific institution. And it had and still has the task of blaming people for climatic events, especially extreme weather events, through their CO2 emissions. Climate change is man-made. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change still has no doubts about this because natural fluctuations cannot explain this change, so the claim. The IPCC has been claiming this since 1990, however. In the fifth IPCC assessment report, the latter claimed that the global mean temperature had risen dramatically. And the years 2015 to 2020 would have been the warmest years since weather records began. However, considering such short periods of time is no proof of the thesis that humans are to blame for this development. It has always existed. If you look at the period from the beginning of industrialization around 1850 to today, the global average temperature has just risen by 1.1 degrees. And not because of industrialization, but because the Little Ice Age came to an end around 1850. 1250 AD to 1840-1850, so we are in a warm period. In the medieval warm period of 950 AD, up to 1250 the global average temperature was even 1.5 to 2 degrees higher than today. The Romans even cultivated wine in Greenland at that time. And at that time, humans had guaranteed not to have blown any CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. Now you will probably say, but there were no weather records at all. That's right. But the scientists have developed a method in which they examine the oxygen isotope ratio in calcareous shells on the ocean floor. From these deposits in the marine sediments, it was possible to draw conclusions about the climate at that time. You can quickly read it on the Wiki Education server. Unimpressed by this, IPCC co-author Johan Marotzke from the Max Planck Institute for Meteorology at the University of Hamburg assumes that the future will be warmer in shorter periods due to the rise in sea levels. However, it should be positively emphasized that, unlike his brother in spirit, Professor Litte from the University of Kiel, Marotzke does not babble about tipping points, according to which the temperature increase would be irreversible after these tipping points were exceeded. Point of no return, according to Marotzke, this point does not exist. This is at least a positive indication in connection with the otherwise prevailing disaster poetry. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change operates with delight. In his latest summary of the sixth assessment report, AR6, for politicians, he assumes that the Earth is heading for a warming of around 3 degrees. The harvest would decrease by 4 to 10%. But the worst was still to come. The increasing heat would increase the risk of hunger for 8 to 80 million people by 2050. What a range! The collapse of entire ecosystems, water and food shortages and diseases as a result of global warming would increase ever faster in the coming decades. Even if people succeed in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In North America in particular, Extreme heat waves will increase, according to climate researchers Eric Fischer, Sebastian Sippel and Reto Nutti from ETH Zurich in the latest Nature Climate Change magazine. In principle, this would also apply to extreme precipitation, said Fischer. The gentleman also claimed that one is in a position to have found a fingerprint of climate change in any weather behavior. It couldn't be more presumptuous. And at the end of the AR6 report, policy recording, the IPCC provides unwanted election campaign assistance for all Greens. It is now necessary to implement a climate justice concept. The way of life and consumption of all people must be redefined. The Green definers will certainly not miss this lead in order to justify further restrictions and the reduction of prosperity. In any case, these are guns that should not fail to have their media effect on people. The glorious floods in North Rhine-Westphalia and Bavaria as well as the terrible forest fires in Turkey and Australia were quickly dished up by the media as a specter of the future climate. Brazen. Just bold. There is only one catch: all IPCC statements are prognoses based on hypotheses and assumptions. Scientifically completely legitimate. Also the associated model calculations, provided that they are made without political or economic sponsors. But weather data modeled on the PC based on certain assumptions about the course of the weather in the next few decades should not be confused with reality. And certainly not one should present such probability calculations as a fact, as it has been apocalyptically portrayed daily by the daily press as well as by private and public broadcasters since the introduction of the EG in 2000. All the underpinnings in this regard are nothing more than reading coffee grounds. A part of politics is probably beginning to suspect that too. Because the environment and energy ministers of the G20 countries could not agree in Naples in July 2021 to limit global warming by a maximum of 1.5 degrees by 2030. Even the prediction of Professor Dr. Litt of 2012, in a few years there would be no more winter, turned out to be nonsense. Also that the alpine glaciers would disappear completely and the sea levels would rise dramatically. According to the German Weather Service, DWD, the statistically assumed increase in extreme weather events has not been observed for 150 years. The claim that regional storms are the effects of climate change is not tenable, according to the meteorologist Andreas Friedrich from the DWD. This is what the Federal Environment Agency says in its report on the German strategy for adaptation to climate change in 2019. No trend can be read for the floods in summer in a long-term comparison. However, this is not to say that this does not represent a catastrophe for the people affected and that they can quickly come to the assumption that the climate catastrophe will strike mercilessly. Man can only think in brief periods. That the sunspots, low cloud formation and reduced cosmic rays result in an increase in temperatures on Earth seems to have somehow escaped the IPCC. Likewise probably also that reduced sunspot activities according to the second law of thermodynamics leads to a temperature decrease. For free. Nobody in Germany wants to hear anyway, right? We have therefore also translated this article into 5 other languages.